Hi, I'm Liz Smith, North Dakota Forest Service Forest Stewardship Program Manager, and this is the first of a four-part series on managing mature windbreaks. For the purposes of this discussion, we will define a mature windbreak as one that has been planted for at least 20 years and is functioning in its intended purpose. Prior to maturity, the focus is on establishment of the windbreak. Many of the things we will discuss will translate to windbreaks under 20 years of age. Today we will be discussing the North Dakota statewide Windbreak Renovation Initiative. In upcoming weeks, we will discuss how to scout a windbreak, how to assess windbreak performance, and techniques for managing a mature windbreak, commonly called windbreak renovation. Throughout the four segments, we will discuss tips, tricks, and lessons we have learned in the over 150 or so years of growing and managing windbreaks in North Dakota. This presentation is part of the North Dakota Forest Service's Forestry Friday series, and we encourage you to visit the North Dakota Forest Service's website and the Forestry Friday YouTube channel. First, some definitions. Throughout this series, you will hear me use the terms windbreak and shelterbelt interchangeably. What I'm talking about are tree plantings established for the primary purpose of altering the flow of wind. These windbreaks may also serve many secondary purposes, including providing products like fruit or nuts. They may add aesthetic value with pleasing flowers or fall foliage. They likely also provide wildlife and pollinator habitat, as well as many other ecosystem services and benefits. Windbreaks fall under two very general categories. Farmstead windbreaks are wide, dense, tall plantings that are intended to virtually stop or very dramatically slow wind and to create large snow storage drifts in specific locations. This type of windbreak includes living snow fences along roadways. Field windbreaks, on the other hand, are less dense and often designed to slow the wind, not to stop it. This provides many benefits to crops during the growing season and also serves to spread wind-driven snow evenly across the field. While each windbreak is different depending on species, site characteristics, and other factors, I would say that from 20 to 40 years old is sort of that age where windbreak trees have slowed rapid growth both in height and width and are functioning in their intended purpose and generally require little interventions. All windbreaks do need to have some level of management, but after 40 years, the need for active management becomes more and more important if the windbreak is going to remain functional. North Dakota's Forest Action Plan serves as a strategic framework to outline priority forest resources, designate important issues, and identify strategies to address challenges and opportunities. Windbreaks and other conservation tree plantings are identified as priority forests and are an important part of North Dakota's rural heritage. Well-designed and maintained shelter belts can improve home and farmstead energy efficiency, provide snow control, protect crops and livestock, and keep a roadway clear, and improve overall quality of life. Nowadays, it's hard to imagine North Dakota without windbreaks. Since it was first established in 1862, the U.S. Department of Agriculture has encouraged and advised farmers on incorporating tree plantings into their farming operations. Farmers' bulletins of the late 1800s were sometimes lengthy documents covering everything from how trees grow to how forest plantations can provide an additional source of farm income. From a practical standpoint, the woodlot could be used for fuel, lumber, and fence posts for the farm operation. Originally, this advice was for farmers in the eastern United States, but as settlers moved westward, they were encouraged to take trees with them. Efforts to establish forest plantations on the plains through policies such as the Timber Culture Act had some success in North Dakota, but windbreaks took hold early as they made quality of life so much better on the harsh prairie. By the turn of the 20th century, plains farmers were advised that the very first crop they should plant on their farm was their Shelterbelt to increase their property value, protect their buildings from severe winds, and provide shade and comfort for humans and animals. As the Shelterbelt matured, the trees could be thinned and harvested for on-farm needs. Starting in 1916, the Northern Great Plains Field Station, today known as the USDA's Northern Great Plains Research Laboratory at Mandan, North Dakota, began a cooperative Shelterbelt demonstration project. Farmers were given tree seedlings and instructions for design, planting, and care. For farmstead windbreaks, Shelterbelts were oriented on the north and west sides of the yard to protect from harsh winter winds and wind-driven snow. A 20 to 30 foot wide two-row snow hedge was to be established around the outside, then a 30 to 60 foot wide snow trap was created. The Shelterbelt itself was 50 to 100 feet wide with an additional 50 to 100 feet of space left between the Shelterbelt and the farm buildings. Designs for gardens and orchards were on the west and south sides to protect young plants from strong summer winds, with narrower rows to the north and east for an added measure of protection. Following the Great Depression and the massive dust storms of the 1930s, the Great Plains Shelterbelt Project was proposed as both a jobs development and erosion protection program. A zone was identified from the Canadian border to North Texas that would be targeted for program funds, and from 1935 through 1942, nearly 223 million trees were planted, including over 18,000 miles of field windbreaks. The program included a recommended design and a list of species for each state based on a review of the performance of existing Shelterbelts planted through previous cooperative projects. North Dakota's species list included cottonwood, American elm, golden willow, green ash, bur oak, among other deciduous trees that are native to our region. Conifers like ponderosa pine, blue spruce, and Rocky Mountain juniper were recommended, and shrubs like carragana, Russian olive, chokecherry, lilac, and honeysuckle. Planners and planters were advised to use a design that had been proven effective. Plant shrubs on the outside rows, followed by conifers, with the inside rows to be planted to deciduous trees. The windbreak cross-section would have a dome or peak in the middle, sort of like the peaked roof of the house. Number of rows could vary from 8 to 10 up to 20 rows or more, depending on the space available. A survey of the Prairie States Forestry Project in 1954 determined that about 3/4 of the original Shelterbelts were in fair or better condition, and 92% of them still existed. This tells us that these windbreaks made it through their establishment phase, where many windbreaks fail, and were reaching maturity. Many of these windbreaks, now around 80 years old, can still be found in North Dakota, along with windbreaks of similar age and design outside that Shelterbelt zone that the project targeted. By the 1960s, a new windbreak design was being promoted that was billed as having many of the benefits of a multi-row design, but overcoming many objections raised by farmers, such as windbreaks taking up too much space and multi-row windbreaks being difficult to cultivate. The recommendation was for 3 or more rows to be laid out parallel to each other 20 to 40 rods, or about 300 to 600 feet apart across the field. Species recommendations were for deciduous trees or shrubs, or deciduous trees and shrubs alternating within the row. These windbreaks were fairly low density and intended to work together as a system to slow the wind and spread snow evenly across the entire field, thereby harvesting moisture from the snow to be available in the spring. In dry western North Dakota, tree strips often corresponded well to farmers' alternate year fallow crop rotation systems. Around this time, Siberian elm also became very popular as a component in multi-row windbreaks, especially on tougher soils where many other species struggled. Siberian elm was often included with Native American elm in the center, deciduous tree row portion of the classic windbreak design. Siberian elm's fast growth habit, adaptability to many soils, and drought hardiness made it a go-to choice for single-row windbreak systems as well. So that's the very abbreviated short story of how North Dakota's windbreaks came to be. And this brings us to managing these mature windbreaks, often referred to as windbreak renovation. Windbreaks, especially farmstead windbreaks, were being planted in North Dakota well before the turn of the last century. These windbreaks were generally managed by thinning the trees for on-farm use and replanting as needed to fill the gaps. But as other sources of heating became more popular, farms became consolidated and more mechanized, farm families became smaller, and many other factors came about. The overall condition of these windbreaks generally deteriorated faster than the implementation of renovation activities needed to keep them functional could keep up. The need for renovation and the speed that old windbreaks were disappearing compared to the new windbreaks being planted was identified many decades ago. There were many efforts to save the windbreaks, and all met with a certain measure of success. Around 2014, the North Dakota Forest Service put a specific call out for landowners to contact us if they suspected their windbreak was deteriorating. And boy, did they call. We got calls from all over the state, and we, along with our conservation partners, scouted hundreds and hundreds of mature windbreaks. We then provided each landowner with a summary of our assessment and provided management recommendations. We are going to talk about scouting a windbreak in part 2 of this Managing Mature Windbreak series, and we'll cover windbreak performance assessments and renovation techniques in future discussions as well. So let's stop here for a minute and define renovation. For many of us today, renovation conjures up images of a big yellow machine with tracks, clearing out old trees and pushing them into a pile. However, although complete removal may be the only option in certain cases, in most circumstances, we found that the windbreaks we looked at were not lost causes at all and could be improved. Windbreak renovation can include any number of activities undertaken to restore or modify the function, increase the health and vigor, and/or increase the longevity of an existing windbreak. Let's face it, most of North Dakota is just a tough place to live if you're a tree. Our soils, topography, and climate are all more conducive to grass cover than tree cover. Many farmstead sites were chosen because they offered a nice view, or were close to a road, or to family, or any number of other considerations, not because they were the best place on the quarter to grow trees. There's an excellent short video on our YouTube page that goes into much more detail on the challenges of growing trees in North Dakota. There's rarely one factor that causes a windbreak to decline, but for many of North Dakota's windbreaks, there is one factor that has contributed significantly to the overall decline of North Dakota's windbreaks, and that factor is Dutch elm disease. Dutch elm disease was first detected in North Dakota in 1969 and has slowly been killing our Native American elm and Siberian elm alike. The disease attacks and kills mature elm of both species. Siberian elm grows readily from seed that can live for many years in the soil, so it's not uncommon to see dead elm snags mixed in with live young trees. As I mentioned a couple slides ago, elm were used in many successful windbreak designs, often comprising the tall deciduous interior rows of a multi-row windbreak or the entirety of a single row system. Overdependence on only a couple of related varieties of trees is a concern for the longevity of any windbreak or forest system. The destruction of our elm makes the threat of emerald ash borer even more scary because ash is a major component of our windbreaks as well. Many farmers and landowners get hooked on a favorite windbreak species that they have had success with and tend to plant more and more of them, sacrificing species diversity that could otherwise provide a kind of windbreak longevity insurance. So the North Dakota Forest Service and our conservation partners over the decades have talked about how important windbreaks are. We have offered lots of free advice, and we have even provided these personalized step-by-step plans for landowners to renovate their windbreaks. It does become obvious that for some landowners, even if they really want to do the management that is recommended, there is a barrier standing in the way. Generally speaking, the longer a windbreak goes without preventative maintenance or relatively low impact managements, the worse shape it is in and the more expensive the management options become. While we continue to advise a long-term management strategy as preferable, the reality is that we can't go back in time and do maintenance that was never done that would have improved the situation today. The North Dakota Outdoor Heritage Fund, which sets aside a portion of the state's oil extraction tax revenue and can be accessed for various outdoor heritage projects, including conservation projects, was established in 2013. North Dakota Forest Service saw that fund as an opportunity to provide some additional financial assistance for landowners to help them overcome this barrier, and has been able to secure grant funds for this purpose. The support for windbreak renovation is strong, and we believe that our efforts of education, technical support for landowners and the conservation partners that work with landowners, and financial assistance if we can get it, will help keep these valuable forest resources on the landscape for future generations of North Dakotans. Thank you for giving a bit of your time to hear more about managing mature windbreaks. Our next discussion will focus on what to look for when scouting a windbreak. This video and others can be found on the Forestry Friday YouTube channel.